gas emission adjustment industry training. I'm Dan Sokolov, and I'll be delivering the DOB Now processing portion of this training. And my colleague Ian Graham, Deputy Director of Building Emissions at the Department of Buildings, will be presenting the technical aspects of the greenhouse gas emission adjustment process. Next. Great. So let's get started by talking about the agenda. Today we'll be reviewing the background of Local Law 97. We'll review the process for filing adjustment applications based on either excess emissions due to a special circumstance or not-for-profit hospitals and healthcare facilities. You'll have the ability to ask questions, and our expert team will do their best to answer them in real time. Also, this presentation is being recorded and it'll be available on our website for review whenever you need it. Next. By the end of this session, you'll be able to understand when you can request a Local Law 97 adjustment, request adjustment for excess emissions due to a special circumstance, request adjustment for not-for-profit hospitals and healthcare facilities. Next. So some things about the virtual classroom. You may have been to one of our previous sessions for DOB Now Build or Safety, and if so, thank you. This is going to run the same way. But whether you've been through a DOB Now training or not, a few things I wanted to mention. First of all, you'll remain muted the entire time because we have a lot of participants, and unfortunately, we're not able to open up the floor to questions verbally. However, there's a question and answer panel on the right side of your screen, and you can enter any questions you have into there. We have a team of DOB experts who will be looking at your questions, and they'll answer as many as they can. But if they can't answer a question, it's usually because they need to do some research, and the answers to those questions will be posted in a frequently asked question document on our website. Or in some cases, we'll respond to the attendee directly via email. But please ask your questions. We want to answer as many as we can. Next. Thanks. So DOB Now is a web-based portal that building owners, design professionals, and filing representatives can use to complete business online with DOB. The main advantage is that you file from your computer anywhere, anytime. All you need is internet access. Next. Okay. So DOB Now will allow you to create a job filing directly through our website. No more standing in line at DOB, no paper, no lines. DOB Now will allow you to check the status of an application online. It'll speed up the application process by providing real-time feedback during the application and review processes. Excellent. Next. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ian for an overview of Local Law 97.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here. Next slide. So Local Law 97, as you may be aware, is a law which governs greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. Okay, it sets a commitment by the city to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 compared to their 2005 emissions. Okay? Owners through this process are held to limits for their buildings, but they can request adjustments now through DOB Now for a couple of consideration or circumstances. And again, all adjustment requests must be made by registered design professionals. The due dates to apply for adjustments are set in the law, and they are June 30th, 2021 for buildings with excess emissions, and we'll get more into that and what's involved there, and July 21st, 2021 for not-for-profit healthcare buildings. Next slide. In addition to what you'll find in DOB Now, there are additional resources. The DOB Now portal was launched, well, the service notes came out on April 9th. It was launched on following Monday, the 12th. So it's been open for a couple of weeks now. To find additional resources that are sort of associated with what you'll need to do an application, you should refer to our greenhouse gas emissions reporting page on the DOB website, okay? Chapter 3 of the Administrative Code has the current legal language related to Local Law 97. Because Local Law 97 is just one local law. It's been amended a few times, but a conformed version of the code is on the website. And you can get to the links from our greenhouse gas emissions reporting page. I believe you can get to it through the service notice as well. Service notice is there on the right. It's another thing you can refer to get easy access to information related to the law. There is an adjustment application filing guide that's been developed by the department to lay out the wherefore and the how-tos of the numbers and the inputs that you'll need to fill out a DOB Now application. Additionally, there's a companion document for recording information related to the application, part of the supporting documentation that's required to be submitted with the applications. It's the EN 97A workbook, and associated instructions are also listed or available through the website. If you do have specific questions related to greenhouse gas emissions, you can also email them to the email that's on the screen, ghgemissions@buildings.nyc.gov. Thanks. Next slide. All right. So there are two adjustment applications that we're taking right now. One related to excess buildings with excess emissions, and excess emissions under the law means 40% more than the emissions associated with the 2018 energy use of the building. Okay, so more than 40% above the 2018 energy consumption. Successful applications need to demonstrate that those excess emissions are due to a special circumstance, okay, and that the building performs equivalently to a similar building that complies with 2014 Energy Code without that special circumstance, okay? And finally, the owner also has to have a plan and submit a plan to achieve compliance with the 2030 limit, okay, by 2030, all right? The adjustments, if successful and information comes in, we review it and approve it, the adjustment will be 70%. The new limit will be 70% of the building's 2018 building emissions, all right, for that covered building, all right? And this adjustment will apply for the reporting years 2025 through 2030. Next slide. The other type of an adjustment that we're taking applications for is related to not-for-profit hospitals and healthcare facilities. Those adjustments are available for the 2024 through 2029 calendar years, okay, and 2030 to 2034 calendar years, and respectively, they're 85% again of the 2018 building emissions and 70% of 2018 building emissions. Note that these under not-for-profit healthcare includes not-for-profit healthcare owners of buildings. It also includes owners of private buildings with rental space or space leased to not-for-profit healthcare are eligible for this adjustment as well. Next slide. All right.
Excellent. Thanks, Ian. So now let's review the process for filing an adjustment in DOB Now. Next slide. Begin by logging into DOB Now at www.nyc.gov/DOB and you'll enter your e-filing account, email address, and password. If you haven't signed up for e-filing, you can go to www.nyc.gov/e-filing tips, or you can visit the DOB Now training page, which is where you signed up for this training. Also on this training page, you'll be able to view and listen to this presentation anytime you want, and I'll show you this training page in a little bit later. Next slide. So as Ian mentioned, there are two adjustment types, and we'll be reviewing both today. First, we'll select adjustment for a building that had 2018 calendar year emissions that are more than 40% above the 2024 limit. Oh, sorry. Back one, Nick. All right. You go back one slide, Ed. Try. Forward. Oh, okay. Sorry. Next. Yep. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. You'll choose energy, and then you'll select building emissions. Next slide. And then to start a new request, you'll click building emissions adjustment request. Next. Okay, so here we are. So as Ian mentioned, there are two adjustment types, and we'll be reviewing both today. So first, we'll select adjustment for a building that has 2018 calendar year emissions that are more than 40% above the 2024 limit, and we'll click submit. The not-for-profit hospital, sorry, I go back one. So not-for-profit hospital and healthcare facilities, the other adjustment type shares a common process with XX emissions application process. So much of what you're about to see will pertain to both filings, but we'll go into not-for-profit filing process in detail in the second half of our presentation. Thanks, Nick. So after you choose the adjustment type and click submit, this will bring you to the landing page for an adjustment application. Okay, next. Ian? Oh, I'm sorry. The adjustment request starts with 5 tabs: general information, emissions limit, actual emissions, documents, statements, and signature. Next slide.
All right.
Begin the general information tab by entering location information, house number, street name, borough, block, lot. The BIN community board and zip code will be auto-completed once the request is saved. Next slide. Next, enter stakeholders. Applicant information and owner information are required. If a filing representative class 1 preparer may also be entered. And once this request is saved, additional delegates may be added. Next. The adjustment type will be listed at the bottom of the general information tab. Next. You must save before you can move to the next tab. The request number and the status bar will appear. The request number will consist of 97 ADJ, which stands for Local Law 97 adjustment, followed by a 9-digit number. The steps of the adjustment process reflected in the status bar are pre-filing, pending QA assignment, QA review, pending auditor assignment, auditor review, auditor supervisor review, and approved. Next. So next is a landing page for emission limit, and Ian will take you through this and other technical portions of the process.
Thanks, Dan. So to begin, I want to just point out that there's one type of adjustment to the limit per building, per type. So you can get one for excess emissions and no more than one for not-for-profit healthcare. When that gets locked in is when you've just gone through those stages where Dan walked us through in terms of building information, stakeholder information entered and saved. That sets that for there. So if you have multiple consultants out there for building owners, just be sure you coordinate with them in terms of who's doing the application and how. And consultants out there, don't just do a test application, see how it all works, because you could be locking in that application process for a building, and the owner may want to do it themselves. All right. So anyway, moving forward in terms of emissions limits. So After the general information tabs are filled out and saved, you get to the emissions limit tab, where we start to break down the building's occupancy by occupancy group and input the gross square footage. Next slide. So to break down the occupancy in the building, applicants will select all those that apply to the building, and then hit add. Next. At which point this grid will populate with the selected occupancy groups, and the applicant will fill in the gross square footage for each of the occupancy group types within the building. There might be on multiple floors. The aggregate is for each type is placed in those boxes that are in the red square. Okay, the tool will sum up the aggregate gross square footage for the building. Again, that should be consistent. All of these entries should be consistent with other data available to the city in terms of the way the building is broken down, in terms of gross square footage for the building, you know, what kind of information might be on your certificate of occupancy and so forth. Okay. And then for each occupancy group, the tool will calculate individual limit amounts to basically determine the aggregate limit for the building, for 2024 and 2030, right? Note that the aggregate limit is the only limit that you're held to in terms of compliance. Individual breakdown of what's happening in the building is just to get to the total. Next slide. And then you hit save and move forward to the next slide. At which point, so now we've entered the information to determine what the limit for the building is. The next step is to fill out the information related to the actual emissions. Next, you'll see actually this orange bar before we move on has that little arrow to the right. If you click on that, there'll be the detail will show for the actual emissions, but there is this summary table of input so far and kind of telling you how you're doing along the way towards all the metrics that need to be met for a successful application. Next slide. First set of questions will be the amount of emissions related to the special circumstance to be calculated by you outside of the DOB Now tool. The answer will be brought here and then entered in terms of tons of CO2 per year. We do want to understand whether or not the building has any of the meters that are actually on this address are providing energy to buildings on other addresses. Again, the application process is by individual building or by bin. So understanding the flow of energy onto and off of the property are important. Next. The tool will then, if LL84 benchmarking data has been provided for 2018 on an individual building basis, okay, the tool will populate with the energy consumption that's been reported for the 2018 benchmarking data. Okay. Go back. What will be required is for each of the energy sources that are there to enter the number of energy meters in the building for that energy source and for bulk fuel like, you know, steam, or not steam, but fuel oil. You know, on this screen, you see kerosene and propane, things like that. Each account essentially is a meter. And then how many meters are being reported for the energy consumption in that fifth column to the right of the total annual energy supplied to the building by fuel type. How much of that is actually for this building? There might be a difference. We just need to understand what's there. Okay. The numbers in that fifth column are editable, meaning we'll pre-populate with the 2018 benchmarking data where available, but they can be adjusted by users to be corrected if necessary. Next slide. Okay. To add fuel types to the list that's pre-populated, you'll click on that Add Fuel Type button. Okay. And then window will open. You'll select the type from the drop-down list. And again, report the number of energy meters, number of meters reported, and the total energy consumption, annual energy consumption for that fuel type, and then hit save. It'll be added to the grid below. One thing that's important, if you choose the other specify type, you'll have to also include the coefficient for emissions for that fuel type. And that's something that you will have to provide to us. All the other fuel types are pre-populated with the values either from the law or included in the filing guide, also shown in the filing guide for all of those in the law and otherwise. We recognize that there might be other fuels that are not on that list that need to be reported. Chilled water, hot water are of particular note. If you do that and you give us a coefficient, again, in the supporting documentation, you'll need to be providing the rationale for how you determine the coefficient for that energy type. Next slide. When you filled out the energy consumption chart, essentially, the table at the bottom of the screen, you'll hit save, and then it will update with the information that's shown below. Again, that, the greenhouse gas emissions, annual greenhouse gas emissions for the special circumstance that was entered will populate here, and it will compare that against that, the limits that are required to move forward. And if it complies, it will say so here. Also, the 2024 aggregate limit, again, is re-reported from the emissions limit tab that was entered or filled out previously. Okay. We do recognize that some building types may not be currently equivalent to the 2014 energy code, so there may be a delta. There is time for buildings to address that delta, and if so, it will show the amount of reduction that's needed, the minimum amount of reduction that's needed to move forward, and has to be addressed between now and 2024. Okay. It also checks the percentage over and whether it meets the required amounts. Again, if everything works out, it should say comply here. Next. After you've completed this section and hit save, if that energy equivalency reduction is required, you'll get 3 additional tabs. Again, it may not happen for all projects, so it'll only show up as needed. So ECC equivalency summary tab, an emissions reduction summary tab, and a future energy use breakdown summary tab will appear on that navigation bar on the left. Next. So the first step along the way is to identify the strategies, the energy conservation measure strategies or operational changes in the building that will be implemented to achieve the minimum equivalency with the Energy Conservation Code of 2014. To do so, we'll add a strategy type as needed. Next slide. So click on the Add Strategy Type button. Okay, next slide. And windows will appear. You select a type, whether it be an energy conservation measure, a retro commissioning measure, whether it's a fuel cell or distributed energy resource or clean distributed energy, or something else that is an operational or capital improvement to the building. Okay, and then next you'll pick a type. Again, whether it be windows or power or lighting or HVAC or other, and then click Add. Okay, next slide. Okay, you can do this for multiple choices. They'll get added to a little chart down below. You hit Save, and then you'll get an individual line item for each. There's a strategy description window to explain a little more in detail what the measure is. So if it's an ECM for windows, is it solar window films or a window replacement or something along those lines? If it's infiltration related, maybe it's weather stripping and caulking, or replace fuel oil or convert fuel oil boiler to natural gas or something along those lines. Okay. Again, you'll then click to see fuel types. A window will open that shows the different fuel types. Again, the defaults that are from previously reported actual emissions tab. And on this screen, if you need to add a fuel type, because you're going to shift from one type of fuel, add a new fuel to the building as part of how you're going to reduce energy consumption, reduce emissions, you can do so there as well. Next slide. Once you've added a fuel type or you've chosen the fuel type, you start to enter in the annual energy consumption for that fuel type in the units that are listed there. If there's a mistake on this one, I believe it's been corrected in DOB now already. Electric grid information is related to kilowatt hours. Everything else is in kBTUs. Okay. Once you've entered the information, hit update, and then we move forward. As long as the aggregate measures the savings, can we go back one slide? I want to make sure I've covered one thing. The entry values that are included in this screen are savings. Okay, so the idea being, if the measure is going to reduce diesel fuel, you'll put the savings in as a positive value. If for whatever reason, say it's lighting, electricity goes down, that would show up as an electric savings, which would be a positive value. But if the heating energy consumption for the building goes up because the electric lighting power goes down, then you would see also an increase in heating fuel. So if it's diesel or steam or natural gas or whatever the fossil fuel might be, that can be a negative value. So positive and negative values. Positive values are savings, negative values are increases. Next slide. Okay. The aggregate, once you've entered each of the measures in, greenhouse gas emission savings are tallied on the right for each measure, and then they're aggregated together and they're shown up above. So if you see up there, the minimum reduction was at 200 and is at 62 or 82. I can't quite see, it's pretty small, but we can see that the aggregate savings that's for each of the measures listed below is 700, which is more than enough to meet the minimum. And the tool will tell you that, yes, you've met the required amount. Next slide. Okay. So after entering the individual measures for the energy code equivalency, hit save, and you'll move to the next screen, which would be the emissions reduction summary. Okay. This is where applicants will enter the strategies that they will pursue to achieve the 30% limit or the 2030 limit, right? If you get to the 2030 limit, what are you going to do to get there? Okay, remember that's one of the requirements. You have to have a plan to do that. We just want to know what the savings are associated with each of the measures is going to be to get to that value. Okay, first step, next slide. Hit enter strategy type. Now, remember that, next slide. After you hit the strategy type, you'll enter it the same way you did before. And what will happen is the aggregate ECC equivalency summary, okay? All the measures that you put there are the starting point to get from your 2018 emissions to your 2030 limit, okay? So they get aggregated and they are the first line item on this screen, and it gets done automatically, but you have to hit this add strategy type. You'll notice up above that just getting to the 2014 equivalency is not enough, and the bar at the top tells you that it doesn't comply, meaning you have to add more strategies. Next slide. Again, same thing. Hit add strategy type, you'll get these drop-down menus, and you fill this out the same way you did for an ECC equivalency reduction strategies. Next slide. Okay. Again, you get the same chart, same little grid telling you what measures you've selected to fill out. Hit save. Next slide. Okay. And then you will fill in the chart the same way you did before. Again, you can add fuel types if new fuel types are going to be necessary to get to the limits that you need to get to. And again, the values that you enter in here, you go to the next slide. Okay. The values that you enter in here are Again, you can, you add measure descriptions in the strategy number description window, and you add in the values into each of the fuel types associated, the savings associated with that measure. Again, positive savings or positive values, increases in energy consumption are negative values. So reductions in energy use for that fuel type is a positive value, increases are negative value. You hit update, next slide. And it will calculate the individual measures, the greenhouse gas savings for the individual measures, and then it will aggregate them in total, and it will compare that to the minimum required. So you see above in that little chart, minimum greenhouse gas reduction plan required. There's the target, that 1180. The measures that have been entered get you to 1180, and therefore it meets the requirement. And you'll see that the bar at the top in yellow with the little checkbox says it complies with the 2030-34 emissions limit. Okay, next slide. Finally, not finally, but on the technical side, right? The future energy use breakdown summary in terms of entries. This is where we're asking applicants to enter the breakdown, not just by fuel type, but also by end use for the final building that will meet the 2030 limit. Okay. To do so, again, it will pre-populate with energy types that have been that were part of the application so far, and you will go in and hit enter. So we'll go to the next screen. Okay. If for some reason a fuel type is missing, you can add it here, and you can enter end uses by detail. So you click on the enter end use hyperlink. Next slide. And you'll get a chart. Okay. End uses are by end type are on the left. Okay. The basis for the reported energy use, again, how are you determining that this is going to be the energy consumption for that end use for this specific fuel type, because you enter it fuel type by fuel type. And you'll say whether it's going to be, you're doing it based on meter data or manual calculations or an energy model was run. Okay, so select one of those and then enter in the fuel consumption, the total annual fuel consumption, projected for that end use. So again, if we're dealing with diesel fuel, maybe that affects heating and hot water. So there would only be entries, say, for the heating and the hot water, unless you're using diesel for somehow you're doing for space cooling. You could do that as well. Not every single end use will have a fuel type associated with it. Once you've filled out the appropriate values, you hit save. And we go to the next screen. And you would fill out the rest. Okay. Again, it will calculate the aggregate emissions for each fuel type based on the entries for each of them by end use, and it will sum them up. And as long as the total in this aggregate value is less than the value that's associated with the 2030 limit, which is shown up above, okay, then it will comply. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. All right, actually, let's go back one slide before we go to documents. There is right above the red box that circles the greenhouse gas emissions for each fuel type. You'll see there's a change view button. Sometimes I find it easier to look not at the totals for each of the fuel types, but to look at the end use breakdown. If you hit the change view, it'll show it to you in a different format. In terms of to show the end uses and the fuel types, the energy inputs that have been done there in a different grid. So it's just a different way of visualizing the information that's been entered. Okay. And with that, we move to documents. Next slide. All right. At this point, you'll move to the required documents section that have to be uploaded. Again, all the values that have been entered are all based on information that you've determined before you got here. And we'll have to have supporting documentation associated with it that clearly describes, or shows where the information came from and how you got to it. Next slide. To upload these documents, you'll hit Add Document. There will be a document name window and a type. You'll select the type. All of the ones that are listed there are essentially required upload documentation. The not required section obviously is not required, but it's if there's additional documentation that you'd like to provide with your application that isn't otherwise included in the other areas, you can select that as well. Okay, so you'll give the document a name, select the type, and then you choose a file, all right, from your own system. We are asking that for the EN97A that you upload both the PDF version of it and the Excel workbook version of that, okay? All right, and then you hit upload for each of the files that are there. Note that you can upload more than one document for each type if you choose for that category, okay? If other information is combined in a bigger report and addressed in another upload, you can also just upload a document that tells us that. And next slide. All right. Dan, do you want to take us through statements and signatures?
Yep.
All right.
Absolutely. Thanks. Next slide, Ed. So both the applicant of record and the owner must sign into DOB Now and click the checkbox to attest to the adjustment request. And by clicking that checkbox, it'll auto add the name and the date. Next. So fees, if any, must be paid before the adjustment request can be submitted. So if you're doing a special circumstance request type and it's a for-profit building, the fee is $2,450. A special circumstance request type and a not-for-profit building, there's no fee. Next. So to make a payment, you'll click the Pay Now button at the right of the screen. Next. At which point you'll get a pop-up notification which will remind you that payment is not the last step. After you make your payment, you'll still need to submit your request. So at this point, at that pop-up, you'll click yes, and you'll be brought to the CityPay site where you can make a payment by credit card or e-check. Next. Okay. So once you click preview to file, any missing information will be highlighted in red with an exclamation point on the tab. Click next. Perfect. There's, oh, I'm sorry, back. I just wanted to show the box. Thanks. Enter missing information at that point, and then you would, and then you can proceed. And once all the required information is entered, clicking preview to file will load the application preview pop-up. At this point, you can page through your application by clicking next just to make sure that it is complete. Next slide. Click the checkbox to attest and sign the application and click File to submit the request. Next. Great. Ian?
Yeah, so at this point, we're working through the internal process. If you see that the project has incremented from pre-filing to pending QA, you know you've successfully filed your project. So that's a very important check, because until you actually file the project with the Department of Buildings, we will not look at it, right? We'll think you're still working on it, okay? So it has to get to a filed status, and you'll know that when you see it, that now we're pending QA. It means sitting in the department's lab. Okay. At this point, supervisor will assign it, or someone will pick up the project. Okay, a quality assurance assignment will be made. All right, and the application will move to a QA review. All right. Next slide. All right. This is an administrative review. So we're checking for completeness. If there's something wrong with the documents, the information you provide us that on their face are incorrect, then the QA reviewer will potentially flag it as incomplete, and then you'll get an email indicating what needs to be corrected. Next slide. Okay. Once all those things have been resolved, the QA reviewer will accept essentially the documents as found, and then the project will move into a pending auditor assignment status, at which point an auditor will be assigned to the project, and it will be incremented to auditor review. Okay, and at which point, next slide, the auditor will start essentially a technical review, and if objections are found, okay, the project will be incremented via objections. It'll show up on this screen, and it'll also be added to that navigation, those navigation tabs on the left, and you'll find that there's an objections tab now there as well. Okay. Okay, and emails will be sent to the applicant and the owner indicating that objections have been entered for the project. The applicant and owner will have to work to resolve those. Next slide. Okay, to resolve, to edit the objections, you click on the objections tab, look at the nature of what's there. It will show up in this window. Also, additional comments could be included in the specific documents as PDF comments as well. Okay, the applicant will go through it. They'll move it from to a resolved status and include the justification for what they've changed to resolve the objection. All right, and then hit update. Next slide. All right. At this point, once all the objections have been resolved, there is another attestation requirement, essentially clicking the box, filling in the name and the information, okay, again, by the applicant of record. Okay, slide. Okay, this, objection review process will repeat. The auditor may have further comments, might want additional information, but ultimately, as it goes through the objection review response process, either the project will be approved and the adjustment will be granted, or if it's clear it's not going to make it, it could be denied. Okay, next slide. All right, Dan, you want to take us through the beginning of this one?
Great. Yep. So now we'll review the process for not-for-profit hospitals and healthcare facilities. Next. So you begin by logging into DOB Now at www.nyc.gov/DOBnow. Enter your e-filing account and email address and password. If you need to create an e-filing account, you go to www.nyc.gov/e-filing tips for instructions. Next. You'll hover over DOB Now Safety and choose Energy, and then select Building Emissions. Next. To start a new request, click Building Emissions Adjustment Request. Next. Select adjustment for a building containing a not-for-profit hospital or healthcare facility, and then click Submit. Next. The adjustment request starts with 5 tabs: General Information, Emissions Limit, Actual Emissions, Documents, and Statements and Signature. Next. Begin the General Information tab by entering location information, house number, street name, borough, block, and lot. The BIN, community board, and zip code will be completed once this request is saved. Next. Next, enter stakeholders. Applicant information and owner information are required. A filing representative class 1, preparer may also be entered, and once the request is saved, additional delegates may be added. Next. The adjustment type will be listed at the bottom of the General Information tab. Next slide. You must save before you can move to the next tab. The request number and the status bar will appear. The request number will consist of 97 ADJ, which stands for Local Law 97 adjustment, followed by a 9-digit number. The steps of the adjustment process, as we've reviewed, are reflected in the status bar are pre-filing, pending QA assignment, QA review, pending auditor assignment, auditor review, auditor supervisor review, and approved. Next slide. So next, this is the landing page for emission limit. And again, Ian will take you through this and other technical portions of the process.
Thanks, Dan. So looks familiar, right? It is essentially the same sort of form that we looked at previously for the emissions limit. I will point out that there is an additional requirement. If there are other for-profit areas in the building, we ask that you enter that as an aggregate value, okay? Otherwise, we're asking, again, not-for-profit healthcare buildings to break down their occupancy by occupancy group from within the law. Okay, next slide. All right. Again, similar as before, selected occupancy group, select all those that apply, okay, within the building for the not-for-profit healthcare portion of the building, okay? These are occupancy groups related to occupancies for not-for-profit healthcare spaces within the building, right? Next. At this point, you will add, once you've selected the groups, then you add in the gross square footage, gross floor area for each of those. Note that the other for-profit areas is a value. You'll note to the right of the table, we're not calculating emissions or emissions limit for that portion of the building. We're not asking for a breakdown at this time for that. If for whatever reason, the building has a not-for-profit healthcare portion of the building that is that it's applying for an adjustment limit, and there's another portion of the building that's not, that is for profit, and for some, it might be eligible for an excess emissions. It would be two separate applications. Again, so you can have one bin with two applications. What we're asking for is in this section, that other part that isn't not-for-profit healthcare, okay? Just give us the aggregate square footage so that we know for the bin that the entered area for the building is consistent with other records, okay? At which point, the tool, once you put in areas here, it will calculate the emissions limit by occupancy group, and then it will aggregate them together to get to the 2024 aggregate building emissions limit. Next slide. All right. Once you've entered the emissions limit information, again, a couple of questions appear. Again, do you have meters reported that serve another building? And was an energy model used to determine energy allocations for the building? Yes or no? We recognize that not all buildings will be not-for-profit healthcare related. There might be other for-profit sections of that building that don't qualify, and therefore the energy consumption of the building has to be broken down. We're just want to understand how you came up with that breakdown. Next. All right, so we talked about these first two questions. Next. All right, again, if the building has had benchmarking information entered for calendar year 2018, it will pre-populate with the information that was provided, okay? What we understand is that this fuel list may not be totally correct. It is editable. You can add fuel types, you can delete fuel types, and you can edit the annual values that are shown there, okay, to be consistent. One thing we also recognize is that, again, not all of the energy consumption for the building is related to not-for-profit healthcare, okay? We're asking for applicants to indicate the portion of the total annual energy consumption that is not-for-profit healthcare related to this application. So again, number of energy meters and the in the building and the number of meters being reported is also required inputs. Next. Okay. Again, we've talked about that just a second ago. Number of energy meters in the building versus the number of meters being reported, and a breakdown that is the not-for-profit portion. So if the whole building is a not-for-profit related healthcare building, then the number for total annual energy supplied to the building by fuel type will be equal to the value for not-for-profit healthcare. Okay, but you have to enter the value. If it's not a completely not-for-profit healthcare building, then there'll be a difference between the numbers. Okay, how to calculate the not-for-profit healthcare portion is described in the filing guide. There is a default allocation, essentially using the energy amount per square foot overall and applying it to the healthcare portion. Next slide. All right. The actual emissions will be compared to the will be shown for 2018, and again, the adjusted emissions limits will be listed below. All right. Again, because they're based, again, the adjusted limit is based essentially on the 2018 energy consumption entered. Okay, for the not-for-profit healthcare portion of the building. Have we made that clear? Okay, next slide. Okay, at this point, you're going to end up at the Documents tab again. All right, a list of, let's go to the next slide. All right, you'll add documents. You'll select one, give it a name. You'll notice that on this list of required documents, not-for-profit status is listed, meaning that this is an additional piece of information. The EN97A is a required piece of information also for not-for-profit healthcare. Note in the EN97A, which we're not really training on right now, but the instructions make it clear that depending on your application type, there's different information that needs to be included there, but that's why it's also a required input. Okay. All right. Once you've selected document type, you choose the file from your system and then you upload it. And again, EN97A, both a PDF and a worksheet. Excel worksheet would be are requested. Next. Okay. Back to applicant attestations, Dan.
Yep. Next slide, Ed, please. So both the applicant of record and the owner must sign into DOB Now and click the checkbox to attest to the adjustment request. Next slide. Fees, if any, must be paid before the adjustment request can be submitted. So for a not-for-profit healthcare facility, if it's in a for-profit building, the fee would be $335. And a not-for-profit healthcare facility in a not-for-profit building will be fee exempt. Next slide. To make a payment, you click the Pay Now button on the right-hand side of the screen. Next. A pop-up notification will remind you that payment is not the last step. After you make your payment, you'll still need to submit your request. So you'll click yes here, and you'll be brought to CityPay, where you can pay, make the payment via credit card or e-check. Next slide. Once you click Preview to File, any missing information will be highlighted in red with an exclamation point on the tab. Click once, Ed. Do you want to highlight that exclamation point? At this point, you'll enter all missing information to submit the request. Next slide. Once all required information is entered, clicking Preview to File will load the application preview pop-up page to the application to make sure that everything is complete by clicking the Next button. And please click Next slide. Click the checkbox to attest and sign the application, and click File to submit the request. Next. Ian.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, we're back to how do you know that you've successfully filed? Because it's moved from pre-filing over to pending QA assignment, meaning it's now sitting with the Department of Buildings. Someone will pick the project up to do a quality assurance review. Again, it's an administrative review checking for completeness. And once that assignment has been made or someone's picked up the project to do that review, it'll increment from pending QA assignment to QA review. Next slide. All right. If there's something that they find that's incomplete, they'll mark it as such, and you'll get an email as to what needs to be corrected. Next slide. Okay. Once everything has been resolved, the project will move from QA review over to pending auditor assignment. An auditor will be assigned to the project, and they will begin a technical review of the application. Next slide. If they identify any objections, the project will be noted as such in your adjustment status, and an objections window or a tab will pop up on that navigation set of tabs on the left of your application. Next slide. Okay. At which point you'll open up the objections, review what's there. There might be additional commentary as PDF comments on documents that have been submitted. Take a look at them. Once you believe you've made the adjustments that are necessary, you can move the objection to resolved. Add the justification for what you believe you've done to resolve the objection, and then hit update. Slide. All right, and we're back to statements and signatures. Once you've addressed all of the objections that are listed, the applicant will have to reattest, clicking the box, filling in their name, signing it digitally, and then moving to the next stage. Next slide. Okay. Once all the objections have been either resolved, the project may be approved, or if it's clear that this project just isn't going to get there, it may end up being denied. Next slide. And that's it.
Excellent. So on behalf of the Local 97 Energy Emission team, we want to thank you for attending the webinar session. We're going to keep the Q&A open for about 15 minutes so you can ask more questions and we can address the existing questions. As I mentioned earlier, another way to sign up for e-filing is to go to the DOB Now training page. So Ed, if you could do that. Now, this is a training page where you signed up for this training. Just one second. Terrific. And let's scroll all the way to the bottom. Great. You see helpful links. Register for DOB Now Build or DOB Now Safety. That's where you can sign up for e-filing as well. And then if you scroll about halfway up, this is where the presentation will live, so you can access it anytime you want. It's right there. Perfect. Terrific. And if you're stuck at any point, you can always type in into Google, you can type in the words DOB Now training page, and that will bring you here. So again, we want to thank you, and we're going to leave the QA open. Nice day.